Hi, can everyone hear me well? Yeah? Okay. So like Dan said, my name is Maria. I used to be the alumni volunteer manager at King's College London. I was there for almost 5 years. Before that, so I come from a background of the experience of the volunteers. So I used to work in Harvard's Community Service Center in the US, in Boston University's Community Service Center in the US, and I was a volunteer. I was a mentor, I was that person. So I came into the program with lots of ideas of how the volunteers want to feel, what they want to see. And then when I started managing the program, it's a very different story on the other side. So what I want to do today with my presentation is basically take a bit of work from you and give you a couple of tools to be able to make your job easier so you can, again, think like a volunteer and connect with the volunteers, which is really why we work with alumni and with mentors when you work in volunteering. It's amazing how they are so committed, and if we can have a bit more time to be with them and think about them, the better the program will be. Today, my presentation is going to be quite heavy on content. There is a lot of very clear guidelines or information, so take notes. We'll send the slides after as well. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing another presentation that will be much more interactive, I promise. You can still ask questions. I'll ask a lot of questions from you as well. But I have 5 things I want to focus on today that will help, hopefully, take a bit of burden of resource from you and give you very clear tips on how you can make things easier on you. Either if you have 100 members on your platforms or on your programs, or if you have thousands. So that's the other thing, is scale it very well. So first of all, the mentoring storm. So again, these programs are incredibly useful for many people within our institutions, but they also bring a lot of challenges because a lot of people involved, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of members, everyone kind of wants a piece of this, which is very exciting. So it's how do we manage that without basically working 24 hours a day, which is why I realized at King's I would have to do if I was thinking of taking care of every alumni and also running such a big program. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, so we are going to talk about these 5 things. First, what I call the lighthouse view, so it's how you actually can get an oversight of everything that might happen within your program and then factor in those elements before everything kind of starts getting out of control. Then resource expectations, what I have found really you need as a resource and for you to be able to plan ahead for that. Stakeholder mapping, so we're going to do 2 little exercises on this. And engagement points, what is it that is really necessary for alumni to engage and what is more decoration, what is more extra. So I'm going to give you the minimum you will need to do, ideally, to ensure success in the next 3 years of your program. And then you can always, if you are successful, then you can always add on to that kind of platform or that footprint. And a rough timeline on how usually a mentoring program could look like throughout the year and the key activities that may take place every month of the year. Hopefully that's key. So first of all, the lighthouse view. So before we do anything with our programs, I think we need to sit down and do a brainstorm on listing every little element of the program. So I have just here do the basic ones. Obviously, you have your stakeholders, which will take about 60% of your work in managing them, both internally and externally. So your alumni and your mentors and your students. And here is a list. Obviously, we have our alumni, the students, all the internal stakeholders, your team, and yourself as a stakeholder as well, because you do have other responsibilities. Again, you have limited hours during the day. So that's your stakeholders, and it's 60% of your role, at least in my experience, will be managing this. Then the online platform, so that usually, obviously, if you have one, it takes also work, even though there is this belief you go into it and it kind of runs itself, but it does take a bit of maintenance to be able to run smoothly and give you what you need. Data and technicalities, which can take immense amounts of time, so it's good to have someone technical onto this project on your teams, and all the resources that you may need, including time, obviously budget, and anything else, any materials. So that's just a basic list. Does that sound good? Do you think I'm missing any big elements that you have encountered in your programs? Anything that you're like, it's not on that list? No? We're good? Okay, so these are the elements. And what we're going to do when we do the timeline is that we are going to actually put all of these elements into account on the timeline. So we know that we have to be taking care, basically, or of each of these elements so the program is manageable and it doesn't come. Because the problem is if we don't plan for them in advance, they will prop up in moments where it could be quite complex to manage. So that's why we're going to use that. But that's a useful list when you're planning to make sure you basically think for all of these things, who is in charge? That's a big question. Who will handle this? Is a data team? Is careers? Is someone in your team that does communication? So who is handling every one of these elements? And when? And how do you communicate that? So, yes, so the way I see it is this is how it kind of falls. So if there is a good plan and project management surrounding your program, your internal stakeholders should fall into place. But for me, they actually come first than the audience. If the internal stakeholders are not aligned, it's very difficult to run a program like this. If faculties, and I think the last presentation really touched on that, if faculties, academics, careers, the student union are not on board or at least informed of the program, they might go out and do their own thing, or they might just actually become an obstacle because they don't know what the program is about. Then data is an important piece of these projects, how you run it, how it is clean, and how you use it as well to get the best out of your programs. The platform, so that's your online solution, or if it is paper-based, what your system is to match your mentors, and your audience. So if every one of those elements fall, the audience in the center feels very protected and it's quite easy to manage. So usually the audience needs to be closely managed, surrounded by a lot of organization on your part, a lot of good communication and messaging, because if not, they will then start asking lots of questions, lots of queries. I think at King's at one point, we had over 100 emails a day with questions from alumni and from students a day. So we realized there is something that is not happening at the beginning of the induction of these members, that we're not telling them that they have all these questions, they feel all these insecurities. So we changed the way we did it, and we just made sure the induction process was very, very good. So basically for me, this is the order, and I think sometimes we start with the audience or even the platform, but we don't think first on everything else that goes around it that needs to fall into place. Because again, the platform won't run itself, and your audience won't be happy with just kind of a snippets of information. They do need to understand what they are meant to do and what they are meant to be kind of feeling within these programs. So resource. So I have a question here for everyone here. So who has only one person in their team that is in charge of mentoring, the mentoring offering? Only one person. A lot? Okay. More than one person. So a person and a half. Or more than two people? Good. 1, 2, only 2 people, right? 3. Okay. So, yes. So this might sound a bit, but less than one person actually. I didn't touch on that. How much, roughly, how much percentage of your role? Wow. Okay. So see, this is the. So I do have to say that if you have any type of resource, you can run these programs if you are able to get some resource to plan. So 1/5 of a role is very difficult, but if you, for example, had a month to plan the next 3 years, to know exactly when things are landing, you can then run on 1/5, obviously without that much kind of, many things in between. But it could be possible. But the problem is that usually it's very difficult to get managers, to get anyone, to get yourself to understand you need to give yourself that kind of space and separate yourself from all the noise and everything else around you. So I'm going to give you a bit of basically an idea, and hopefully you can use this. This is all kind of from research, not only that I did at King's, my experience at King's, but also from other universities, on more or less what you need when you're deploying a program like this, then more or less what you need when you're maintaining a program like this. And this could serve as a case for, again, your manager or anyone that you have to ask resource from to say, look, we need to plan this type of timings so things can actually run without that much resource in the long term. And again, hard conversations, but I think they're possible. So the first thing is you need the nominated project coordinator. And this is all project management and overseeing of basically all the elements we saw in the lighthouse view. First, I mean, again, the advice is to plan for a full-time role to basically someone full-time to deploy the project if you're at that stage. Your project is still not live for 3 months. And that's because deploying it is very complex because you have to bring everyone together, you have to create a set of communications, you have to do a lot of things. So it has to be basically 35 hours a week for 3 months somewhere in your team, ideally. Then that lowers after to 60% of our role for the next 2 months. And then it can be lowered to 2 full days a week for the remainder of the project. This is just, again, guidelines. It depends on what your project is, but I think it's useful to understand also that even though it feels very resource intensive at the beginning, if it is good resource intensive at the beginning, it will come down and it will keep going down in time, even if you're getting lots of new members. So that's possible to do with very good planning, that you can actually manage 10,000 with way less time than you manage 100 at the beginning. So that's kind of good to know and hopeful, I think. Then you have daily tasks, so you know there will be daily tasks no matter what you do. And that's email queries and manual authentication. Someone has to do that. That's just something you have to input on a team to do. Then the communications, and that's social media, advertising, emails. If you have a communications team, that's very good. If not, it's just planning for that, but communications will be. And what I will give you next is basically the list of basic communications you will need to be sending. So if you have any doubts on like, how much should I send? Should I do social media campaigns every week? Not necessarily. So it is also good to control the way we recruit, because recruitment can feel quite relentless, but then it means that the feedback is going to be relentless for months to come. So you need to have a recruitment point, prepare for kind of the peak engagement, stop, evaluate, keep recruiting. That's the advice. And in that sense, segmentation is important, which we'll do in a minute. Then in terms of data, so in my experience, the data is hard to set up at the beginning, particularly because you need processes to make your platform talk to your database, if it is RaceSH, if it is something else. So that is someone that knows very well your database, needs to put around 25 hours of work on this. And then about 5 hours a month to kind of support you on how do you actually make this data translate into your database or help you with data in general. The other thing with data with platforms is the fact that you do have a lot of important data that you get from alumni. It's not only business details, but they also put a lot of their story, what inspires them, and those could be very key pieces of information for other engagement initiatives. So you do want to hopefully have some time to go through the spreadsheets and have some systems in place to basically scroll and see if anything comes through that may be important. I think we discovered at King's that about 25% of our members were people that we didn't have business details for, and that their business details were amazing. Like they were CEOs of Disney, they were partners at law firms, people that we didn't know. And the only way we knew was by actually being able to scroll through the spreadsheet, find do a search for example, the word partner, and then all these people will come up that we didn't have idea of, that not only were great mentors and great speakers, but also ended up being sponsors of events, host us like in some venues to run events, and also ended up being donors as well. So there is a huge amount of amazing data that if you can open space to look at, you will be very surprised on what you can find. For us, it was 25% of people that we didn't know about, that were high level, that we should have been engaging with years ago, but we didn't have their business details, and the LinkedIn thing really helped us. That's with Illuminati. And then student fronting staff. So this is who is going to pursue the approach to students, who is going to recruit them, and who is going to manage their queries. And again, that's just kind of a conversation to have with faculties, with careers, or if your offices are student-facing as well, then that's good in that sense. So that's resource. I'm actually going to ask if you have any questions about that, because I think it's quite a lot of things I have said about resourcing. Does that sound good? Yeah?
Can you tell me something more about the student-facing staff, just how onerous the job that is?
Yes. Students are interested, depending on your induction process. So if you have a strong induction process for students, like every student that joins has a half an hour session, or has very good materials on onboarding, it shouldn't take that long. It should be just sending them the link, making them complete whatever you want them to complete, learn the stuff and go into the platform, and then manage them every 3 months or so. Recruitment is different. Recruitment is for students, happens at all times, everywhere in the university, then really it's not a big job for anyone. So ideally, student recruitment will happen from the SU, any career workshop should mention this project. Like anything with careers should mention this. Also, student societies are extremely important for student recruitment, because they have the, kind of personal relationship. So student recruitment, if you can create a strong network, it's not like with alumni. Alumni need more emails, of course, because you don't have them there and you don't have the networks to reach them other than your email address. I will say that if you put a lot of effort on it and careers is on board, it should be 10% of someone's, if that, I think probably 5%, if just recruitment and managing that, if they have a good onboarding. But it's hard to do onboarding, I know that. But I think when we were able to create a set of materials, or students were before mandated to go through a set of materials, do a survey to prove they have gone through them, and then we will let them in the platform, and that basically decreased our inquiries for about 90%. They weren't asking any questions. And every time they asked questions, we sent them a link to the page where all the information was, and they were, they kind of went back to knowing what they had to do. So, yeah. Yeah.
How transparent were you that you were harvesting the business data?
Yeah.
Because if somebody's opting in and doing that, synchronizing with LinkedIn,
Yes.
are they necessarily aware that the institution then might use that data to transfer that data to their database? Just thinking of the elephant in the room at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good too. In our case, we never, for example, share that data with anyone other than our team. That was never sent to anyone. If we ever, for example, made an approach to an alumni because we read they were amazing and we want to contact them, we will always do it on the basis of the program. So we notice you have spoken to a student in King's Connect, which was the name of the platform at King's, and King's Connect, and we would like to take you out for coffee to see how your relationship is going, how you are finding the platform. And in that meeting, then it will come up, you will be a great speaker for an event, or oh, you are just down the street. Maybe one day we could partner for an event. So yeah, we will always go with the thing they have authorized us to do, but we will target face-to-face meetings that way, basically, reading the data, if that makes sense.
So I'm just in the early stages of launching phase, and the feedback that we're getting, most people just signed up, opted in without any hesitation.
Yeah.
But where there is hesitation, it is obviously revolving around, who's holding the data, what you do with the data,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. So maybe the experience of some years back, it's going to be a different experience.
Yes. We did have some questions about it. Some people were concerned, and we always said you will be contacted on the basis of you are a mentor, you are a person that are giving advice, for example, or you are on an online directory. We might contact you to know about you, but always on the basis of that. We were as strict as that our data kind of research wasn't even sent to our research team. They were never escalated for financial ask, for example. Again, unless the relationship came for us. So it was my people, let's say, the alumni that I met, the alumni that my team met, that did that. And we had actually objectives around meeting alumni face-to-face that were interesting. But it was always to tell them more about the mentoring program, and then to scope what else do they like to be involved in. And if they don't want to be involved in anything else, we will get their business details because they accepted that, but they wouldn't be solicited at any point, or we didn't share the data as well with anyone. At King's, the data was completely centralized. Even fundraisers sometimes were like, love to see that.
Just to add to Camille's point, obviously Declan's referring to GDPR. It's not a dirty word, you can say it. So we're having a lot of conversations now with clients who want to revise, for example, the privacy policy, so that you can actually make sure you're clarifying what data you collect, how it's being used, and that effectively is communicated at the point of entry. Yeah, so you can do it at the point of registration. You can also do it again if you want at the point of entry into the mentoring module itself. So there are various ways you can actually make sure that that's communicated in a way that's going to be compliant from next month.
Okay, I'll move on from here and you can ask. Now stakeholders. So these are two things that obviously are recommended to do, but are harder to do, which is basically list everyone that will need to know about the project, which is basically every single person at your university, but kind of classify them in a way that makes sense to everyone. So basically, internally, obviously, you have the project manager and your team, the immediate team of the project manager. There may be 2 project managers as well. And then careers, widening participation, marketing, international marketing as well, because they are very interested in the international alumni piece on mentoring. Students, so obviously student societies tend, in my experience, the student societies are actually easier to go through than the student union because they are smaller, they have good, strong links with their members. So we chose every year our 10 priority student societies, met their group, met their president, and make sure they were, or advertising people, basically, at all times. And also faculties and obviously departments. And I will take it as far as to have someone in each department that you have a contact with about this program, because departments are very particular as well within their own faculties, and they would like to know more personal information about it. So this is kind of, once you have this list, you ideally will create a mailing list for all of the people that you have chosen to inform about, and they will get reports from you quarterly, and that's about the type of information, or any packages of marketing. But you have a mailing list that is very easy to contact. You're not trying to contact 25 people every time, but you make some sort of strategy that they are contactable very easily by you, and they will be updated every 3 months. So if for internal stakeholders, the best way is every quarter, they should have some sort of update. It could be an email, it could be a full-on analytics, beautiful visuals, it could be an impact story about the program, it could be anything, but they need to get something that says, this is where we're at with the program, this is what's coming next. And that will just basically mean you get way less queries, everyone is on the same page, and hopefully they are your ambassadors within the school. There comes a big problem when we don't do this list, and then a lot of people that should have known or felt they should have known don't know anything about the program. So if you can do it preemptively and tell them this is what the project is, but again, in a way that is easy for you, so do a mailing list, that will be much easier for everyone. So that's the stakeholder mapping internally. We have time. And then obviously external. So I call external the alumni mostly. It could be supporters, it could be staff, it could be parents as well, depending on how you engage. But the most important thing with external stakeholder mapping is to create segments at the beginning and never change them, at least for the first year, so you can test groupings. So what this means is that you decide, for example, your main thing is if they are in the UK or abroad. So all the UK people always get this email, and they might get it then filtered through faculty, but that's your first thing that you're doing. Segment by age is a very good strategy as well. If you want, segment by a strategy group, so WP. But what you want is to keep the one messaging. To test a group, you need to keep a messaging for ideally a year. So you will create these segments. Usually this type of segmentation will give you about 20 groups. So 20 groups you're emailing. I know it sounds a lot. But that means that basically you're getting all this data about how those emails actually work or not work, and also how those groups perform in the platform. Because once you have the data, then you know who you're going to focus on. You know who gives you more trouble, you know who doesn't. But this has to happen before. I have encountered lots of problems when you segment every time, you segment differently, and then they get different messages and they never know what should they be doing. There was a point when we actually switched our segmentation from faculty to age, and that was huge because then, for example, 30 to 49 alumni that were 30 to 49 were getting the ask to be mentors. But in the past, they have gotten the ask to be mentees by the faculty. It's an example. They were very confused. So if you can have the messaging for each of your segments as well needs to be clear. What do you want them to do? Just to use the directory, just to contact each other informally, just to be mentees or mentors. You will always mention you can be both. You're not trapping them. But your subject line needs to be related to their segment. Only the subject line. The rest of the text can be basically the same, because again, you don't want to spend too much time with this. I think the subject and a couple of words initially that say, we will love you to mentor a student, or to find an alumni to help you, or to support you, or to advise you. So that first line and the subject. But if you have the segments, then also it's much easier to email, because the segments are there, your data gets full, always based on those segments, only excluding the people that has joined the platform if it is recruitment, then you can do quite well on these emails without that much effort. So that's what a stakeholder mapping externally will be, which is really have your segments very, very clear from the onset and keep to it for long. I think that's hard as well, because once an email lands, people think if it didn't work, obviously you can change the wording, but don't change the segment because you're not sure how the segment is going to react on time either. So that's my advice. Create the segments and keep it, and know exactly who your stakeholders is as well. And if you need to then choose only one group to do this first, then do it that way. But you need to know who you're sending these things separately and have some sort of way to compare groups. Because if not, you're in the thing that you send a massive email to 60,000 people, and it's so hard to get that data from one email on who performed better and why they performed better and what could have made the difference. So that's kind of a thing that I highly recommend. Then I'm going to go now with what I call non-negotiable engagement points. So these are engagement points that should happen and that you should put on your timeline almost no matter what, even if you have very little resource, because they are important. So, and they are the ones that will assure your program at least is growing somehow in numbers, or in engagement, or in what your objectives are. So for alumni, obviously, I only recommend 2 recruitment drives a year, but basically 2 emails, one and with 2 follow-ups each. That's all. And then see how that goes. If it goes well, obviously, ideally. Usually the 3rd follow-up yields so many people for some reason. So that's very good. So just twice a year do recruitment drives if you can. Don't do recruitment all year round, because it could be very, again, and it's also very disorganized for you, because then you have to, all the welcome, all the process becomes complicated. So if you can do 2 recruitments and you're getting good numbers, kind of stick with that. Obviously have a graduations present, do social media campaigns, but again, not as often. I think people sometimes do weekly social media campaigns, which is fine, but again, it might cause a lot of people coming to you every week, and then you don't get a break. So I will say once monthly. If you have very active networks, that could be enough. Phone campaign presence, if you have any regular giving phone campaign, make sure all of them are trained, so they're talking to alumni about it, and you don't have to worry about that group. It's also, mentoring is a very good, if they don't want to give money, they can give their time. It's a very good script addition. And then presence on printed materials is if available, and face-to-face meetings if you can. So like I said, in my case, we had objectives for this. It was only 2 or 3 every 6 months. So it wasn't I was meeting all day with people. But it really helped us get more insights into what alumni were experiencing in the platform, and you don't get the same insight ever unless it's face-to-face or on a phone conversation or on a Skype call. So try that. Choose an alumnus that is doing a lot of engagement. Choose one that is not engaging at all, and see if they reply to your email and ask, you signed up, you were obviously interested, what's your take on the platform? So I will try that. And then choose one that is medium medium involved, which is like basically maybe they have sent 7 messages, not that much. So see what is it that they're doing with their mentoring relationship. Yeah, so that's with alumni. And optional is events. But if you do the other things, you should be fine with recruitment for a year if they are segmented well. In terms of students, again, just place yourself everywhere you can and then almost forget about it. Just send reminders to the people. So careers advertisement, student union communication channels. Again, my target is specific student societies. I would recommend 7 student societies that are very, very active in your university, but it could be less. It could be 2 or 3. Printed materials, if you can, faculty communications or faculty, yeah, any faculty communications, and also face-to-face meetings with students. Again, nothing beats a good face-to-face meeting. So ideally, you will have that time. I think sometimes it feels like we're so busy for that, but a half-hour face-to-face meeting can give you more data sometimes than scrolling through a spreadsheet for 6 hours. So if you can do that, you will get a lot of insight into what you're doing. And it will also help you put yourself into the position of the user, which you forget in the project management, or I found difficult to do. And again, optional events, but they are not mandatory, and they are a bit harder to run as well. And then current members. So you have a communication plans for your recruitment, and then you have to have a communications plan for your current members to increase their engagement. Now, how does this work? So my rule is 5 communications to current members a year. That's the minimum. 3 should be only about fun content, like resources, fascinating, an article you found, a TED Talk, nothing that will take you any longer than 10 minutes, basically, to draft. So they feel connected to the program and they think, oh, they're thinking of me, they saw this video and they thought it was interesting. It doesn't even have to be hardcore mentoring content. It could be like, again, an inspirational tech to dimensions mentoring, even like an image that is interesting, anything that you can send them. A personality kind of learning styles quiz, we'll try that tomorrow as well. So basically sending them this so they feel part of the project. Nothing big, nothing complicated, just send it to everyone in the platform. Then 2 segmented emails, and you'll see on the timeline where they land. Basically this is, you will again do segments, but for the people in the platform, and you will talk to them very specifically about their status in the platform. So as an active mentor, as an active mentee, as a mentor in a relationship, as a person that doesn't have a profile pic. I used to actually ask for this, because if you don't have a profile pic, you don't have a LinkedIn sync, you don't have business details in your profile, you're not going to get contacted. So we will send them, we noticed your business details are not on the platform, you don't have information on your profile. If you update it, you will get more connections. So basically, it's a nudge for them to say, you're in this program, we would love to see you interacting more, remember we exist. And again, very simple content, very short, is what is recommended, and only twice a year, not more than that. I remember being so stressed every time I could see engagement not being as high as I wanted, and wanting to send emails monthly. And what I did is that I desensitized my alumni from the emails I was sending, because they kept hearing from me constantly. Well, if they hear from me with this, and we did a study on this, and the feedback was, when you send an email, we think it's important. You're telling us something about the program that we haven't heard. We want to read it, and at least increase a lot on the engagement. So that's kind of my advice. And then if you can, but this is only if you can, a thank you or an impact story. Nothing fancy, just a note. In my experience, volunteers, or at least mentors, didn't like thank you events, didn't like many thank you things, but you could always say, there is many ways you can do this. I mean, an example, if there is a play on campus, you can tell them about it. And say, you're a great mentor and there is this amazing play, you could do discounted tickets, you could do first beat tickets, you could do something very simple that is already happening, that doesn't take you any time, but that they feel. Also, alumni really like an impact report, short, that just says, this year we have grown 1,000 alumni, 200 students, and next year we're going for more, that type of thing. Yeah, so I think that might help. If you see it this way and you make notes on your timeline, it's really only 5 times a year that you're going to be concerned about sending emails, plus the 2 recruitment emails you're sending plus the follow-ups. So it's not all the time, every day thinking, I need to send an email to these people. But every time you have the emails, you have the structure and you send them, and then you hope for the best, which usually, these things usually don't fail in at least create some traction. They might not be the type of, huge engagement growth, but they will create it, and then it will just go from there and feel invigorated. So my last advice before the top tips, I know I have spoken a lot, but hopefully useful tips, is to use formulas. So just put yourself numbers that are very clear. I think in our job, engagement is hard, we know all of this, it's hard to quantify, and I think it's hard to quantify, and therefore the plans feel impossible to make, because there is so many elements. So just choose a couple of numbers you want to reach, and put them on your timeline. What are you going to do to reach those numbers? And that's it, basically. And center everything on a specific number. So for example, how many meetings with prospective alumni you want to have a month or a year? How many meetings with current members? How many emails annually? And that's your top. You cannot think about sending any more emails. How many recruitment emails? How many touch points with current staff? How many touch points with internal staff? So put in your calendar, quarterly report to staff, no movable deadline, just do it. So if you're working with this, and ideally, basically, the sum of these formulas will be between 10 and 15 actions a year. That's it. It will really help you feel you're doing a lot for your program, but make you feel much less stressed and much less overwhelmed, because you know when you're reaching, you know if you reach the 15 to 20 engagement points in your year, you're doing great at your management, no matter what. And you can then analyze which works better, which works doesn't. That's the other thing. If you, for example, say, I had 10 meetings, but they didn't work, you're like, okay, I can put now 10 things, 10 more actions on emails because they worked. And then it's almost like very easy mathematical way to do it, that you can move around how many things you can do a year. So that's just a strange way to do it, I know. But I think it really works if you have very clear things. Clarity is everything on these programs. I think, again, a lot of elements, a lot of complexity. If you can have just targets that are very clear and that you can measure at the end of the year, it will be much better, it will be much easier. Yes, and my last slide, we still have to do the timeline actually. We'll send this around, but this is just a sample on what happens on a year. It all depends on your institution and when you do graduations and when you do commence everything. So this is just a sample on what it will look like in a normal academic year. So you will start recruitment before September. So in September, you can really do push for student recruitment because the students come fresh from summer, all the new students. So you will do that and have graduations presence. Then in October, student recruitment continues and some sort of induction begins. It is an email that you send with resources, it is a video, it is an event, but that usually happens in October. You need to grab them quite quickly before it all becomes very overwhelming academically. Yes, so November is induction continues, and then you will be sending the first resource I mentioned before, so the TED Talk, the little email, and also the segmented email one to current members. So that's November. Because by November, you would have had a lot of people joining from your August recruitment. All the students are there. So you can then give them a nudge before Christmas that they need to kind of, get active. In December, then you'll do your first evaluation. I used to do surveys, but it depends on what you do. And you then take December, which sometimes is a bit of a quieter month, to be able to, it's never quiet, I know, in our jobs, but to then do what you kind of, basically evaluate a bit what's going on, make decisions if you need to switch your timeline slightly, and the planning day 2. So I recommend 2 planning days a year, every 6 months. And planning day means a full day of planning. And you need to try to block it. I know what can bother you that day. So this will be the planning day 2, because again, you have had such an intense period from August to December. So you want to be able to sit down, think through what you're going to do next, breathe, and make sure you have everything set for January. Then in January will be the second alumni recruitment cycle, second resource sent to all the members as a new year kind of excitement thing. And graduations, if you have graduations in January. Again, it depends what your graduations are. Then in March, segmental email 2, and basically end of March, things start quieting down because when students start doing exams, things quiet down. So this is a great time to do a closing survey for both alumni and students, do full-on evaluation, send a third resource that basically is tell them about what's coming next, and take June to just plan. So plan, evaluate, don't do activities in June, and in July it kind of starts all over again. But in these programs, you should have a month to kind of take a moment and make sure you're seeing the data from the year. And if you block it, it helps. Same thing with the planning days. I used to book them 2 years in advance. I mean, okay, basically, I had 4 days in my calendar that no one could book anything in that were planning days, and I made my team attend them as well. And we did it, and it was full days, tiring, but it was the best because we never had 8 hours to think about mentoring in a row. So doing that changed the way we worked as a team, decreased tension a lot. And now, I think it's the last slide. Yes, so just to wrap up top tips, have a full planning day every 6 months, schedule it now. Your task is to schedule it like now. When you get to your room tonight, schedule it. Engage with current members every 3 months. Those are the segmented emails. So at least it's the segmented emails and the resources as well. So that takes you, basically every 3 months you'll have something, either a cool information or a nudge that they have to do better, or they're doing great. Create resources if you can, and definitely plan for onboarding. Feels so resource intensive initially, but if you can have a set of materials, a little session, even if it is a video of you talking about it, it will change the way your program runs. But again, do it short, so it's easy for alumni to do, and then you can always resend that when they get too many queries. We have done it before. If alumni are not listening to what you're telling them, you have the resource to just resend it to them and say, here is some advice on how to deal with this problem you're bringing me, instead of having to sit down and write a 2-paragraph email saying the same thing you have on your resource. That is very, cool, the resource, so use it. And follow the formulas if you can. Make sure you have numbers around your planning and put those numbers and limit the numbers to only 20. So that's 20 actions. If it is like emails, if it is resources, if it is creating resources, you cannot do that many resources either. So choose where you want to fight, where you want to fight your battle on, and make sure you also keep with it a bit longer than one try, because these things don't solidify until at least 6 months of going. So try for 6 months at least to do this type of approach.